"You don't look like a man who can afford mistakes," she said, glancing at the bill. And the table behind him chuckled like it was a shared joke. But Ethan didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't even look embarrassed. He just nodded once, quiet, steady, like a man who had heard worse and learned not to react, because dignity doesn't shout. It waits. The restaurant hummed under warm yellow lights. Forks clinked against plates. A low murmur of conversations wrapped around him like a wall he didn't try to break. He reached into his worn jacket, counted the cash slowly, short by $12, and for a second, the silence at his table grew heavier than the noise around it. "It's okay," another voice said, softer this time, and that's when she stepped forward, Lily, just a waitress in a simple apron. No makeup trying too hard, no voice trying to impress. She placed a few bills on the table, not looking at the others. Only at him. "I've got it," she said, calm, like it wasn't charity, like it wasn't anything at all. And that was the moment something shifted, because most people helped with eyes full of judgment or expectation, but hers held neither, just quiet respect. And Ethan noticed that he always noticed the small things, the way people treated him when they thought he was nothing, because this wasn't his first time, not even close. He had sat in a dozen restaurants, across from a dozen smiles that faded the moment the check arrived, heard polite voices turn cold, watched interest dissolve in a disappointment. All because he chose to show up like this, worn jacket, old boots, no watch, no signs of the truth. And the truth was simple. Ethan Cole wasn't broke, not even close, but wealth had taught him something most people never learn. Money doesn't reveal character, it hides it. And so he tested the world in silence, again and again, waiting for someone who wouldn't measure him by what he could pay. And most nights, the answer was the same, until tonight, Lily stepped back without waiting for thanks, already turning to another table, already disappearing into the rhythm of the room, and Ethan sat there a second longer than necessary. Not because of the money, but because of the feeling, something unfamiliar, something honest, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was being weighed. He felt seen, not for what he had, but for what he chose not to show, and that quiet difference, that small, almost invisible act of grace, landed heavier than any insult ever had, because sometimes the loudest moment in a room is when no one needs to prove anything at all. "You did not have to do that," Ethan said quietly the next evening, standing at the edge of the counter as Lily wiped down a row of glasses, her movement steady, unhurried, like she lived in a rhythm no one could rush. She glanced up, barely surprised to see him again. "It was $12, not a life decision," she replied, simple, almost amused, and went back to her work. But Ethan did not leave. He stood there for a second longer, as if measuring something deeper than words. The soft hum of the diner wrapped around them. Coffee machines hissed. A bell rang as a new order came in, and outside the window, headlights passed like fleeting thoughts. "Still," he added, "most people would have made it a bigger deal." Lily shrugged slightly, placing the last glass in line. "Most people like to feel important when they help," she said, meeting his eyes for just a moment. "I do not." And there was again that quiet difference. No performance, no expectation, just a kind of grace that did not need an audience. Ethan nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and placed a folded 20 on the counter. "Then let me pay you back," he said, but Lily did not even look at the bill. "You can," she replied, turning away to grab a coffee pot, "by coming back and not pretending you are something you are not." The words landed softly, but they carried weight, and for the first time, Ethan felt something shift under his calm exterior. Not anger, not embarrassment, but recognition. She had seen something, not everything, but enough. He let out a quiet breath, watching as she poured coffee for an older couple, her smile warm but never forced, her attention real, and it made him wonder how many people had missed that about her, because they were too busy looking at themselves. "What makes you think I am pretending?" he asked after a moment, his voice steady, controlled. Lily returned, placing the coffee pot down with care. "Because you look at everything like it is a test," she said, leaning lightly against the counter. "People do not do that unless they're trying to prove something." Ethan gave a faint smile, one that did not fully reach his eyes. "And what do you think I'm trying to prove?" Lily paused just for a second, then answered, "That people only care about money." The air between them grew still, Not tense, but honest, like a truth that had finally been spoken out loud. Ethan looked down at the counter, fingers brushing lightly against the edge, and for a brief moment, the weight of his past pressed in, the conversations, the disappointments, the quiet exits that always came too easily. I used to think that was not true, he admitted, his voice lower now. More real, Lily. Tilted her head slightly, studying him, not with suspicion, but with something softer, something closer to understanding. And now? She asked. Ethan looked back up, meeting her gaze fully this time. Now, I think most people just never get the chance to show who they really are. Lily nodded once, slow, thoughtful, as if she had already known that answer. Maybe, she said, or maybe they just forget that character shows up when no one is watching. And the words lingered, settling into the quiet space between them, deeper than any conversation Ethan had had in months, because this was not about money or status or appearances. This was about truth, the kind that did not need to be announced, only recognized. And as Ethan stood there, in a place where no one knew his name, he realized something unexpected. For the first time in a long time, he was not interested in winning the test. He was interested in what would happen if he stopped giving one. So you just stopped trying? Lily asked, her voice quieter now as the dinner rush began to fade, chairs scraping softly against the floor, the neon sign outside flickering like a tired heartbeat. Ethan leaned back slightly in his seat, eyes tracing the worn edges of the table. No, he said after a pause. I just stopped believing words. Lily crossed her arms loosely, not defensive, just present. And what replaced them? She asked. Ethan looked up steady. Patterns. 3 short words, simple, but they carried years behind them. The kind of years that teach a man to read what people do instead of what they say. The kind that leave him calm in moments that would shake others. Lily studied him for a second longer than before, like she was trying to decide if he was guarded or just honest. The air between them slowed, softened. That sounds lonely, she said finally, not with pity, but with quiet truth. Ethan let out a faint breath that almost became a laugh. It is efficient, he replied, but even as he said it, something in his tone betrayed him, because efficiency does not warm a room. It does not sit across from you and ask how your day was. It does not notice when your hands are tired or your smile fades a second too early. Lily turned slightly, reaching for a fresh pot of coffee, pouring it into his cup without asking. The dark liquid steamed under the dim light. You know, she said, setting the pot down, people are not spreadsheets. Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. No? Lily shook her head, a small smile forming. No formulas, no guarantees, just choices. She leaned against the counter again, closer this time, but still within that quiet distance she never crossed. And sometimes people surprise you. Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, not as part of a test, not as data to confirm what he already believed, but as someone standing right in front of him, unguarded in a way that did not feel careless, just real. And what if they do not? He asked, his voice softer now, less certain. Lily held his gaze without hesitation. Then at least you gave them the chance. The words landed gently, but they settled deep, because chance was something Ethan had controlled for so long, limited, shaped, designed to protect himself from disappointment. And yet here she was suggesting something simpler, something riskier, the kind of risk that did not come with contracts or guarantees. Just trust. The door chimed as a late customer walked in, and for a moment, Lily stepped away, greeting them with that same calm warmth, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts, the hum of the diner filling the space she left behind. And in that quiet, he realized something uncomfortable, something honest. He had spent so much time testing others that he had never considered what it meant to be tested himself, not by wealth, not by status, but by presence, by whether he could show up without hiding behind a story, by whether he could let someone see him without controlling the outcome. Lily returned a moment later, sliding back in a place like she had never left. You always come alone? She asked, casual but not careless. Ethan nodded once. It is easier, he said, and for the first time, the words sounded less like strength and more like a habit. Lily tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. Easier does not always mean better, she said, and the sentence lingered in the air, quiet, undeniable, because sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that do not need to be raised, only spoken. And as Ethan sat there, Under dim lights and fading noise, he felt something shift again, not a revelation, not a dramatic change, just a small crack in the certainty he had built so carefully. And through that crack, something unfamiliar began to enter. Not fear, not doubt, but the quiet possibility that maybe, just maybe, not everything needed to be measured to be real. "You ever tell the truth on a first date?" Lily asked, her tone light but her eyes steady. The kind of question that sounds casual but lands somewhere deeper. Ethan paused, fingers resting against the warm ceramic of his coffee cup. The diner quieter now, past the rush. Just a few late customers and the soft hum of refrigerators filling the space between words. "Which truth?" he replied, a faint edge of humor in his voice. But it did not fully hide the distance behind it. Lily gave a small shake of her head, stepping closer to clear the empty plate in front of him. "The one that matters," she said, simple, direct. And for a moment, Ethan did not answer, because there were too many versions of truth he had learned to control, too many ways to shape what people saw before they decided who he was. "I tell enough," he said finally, careful, measured. Lily set the plate aside, her movements calm, unbothered. "Enough to protect yourself," she corrected gently, not accusing, just observing, and that was the thing about her, she did not push, she did not corner, she just saw, and somehow that made it harder to stay. Hidden, Ethan leaned back slightly, eyes drifting toward the window where the reflection of the diner lights blurred into the night. "You think that is a bad thing?" he asked. Lily considered the question for a moment, folding a napkin absent-mindedly between her fingers. "I think it depends on what it is costing you," she said. And the answer hung there, quiet, unforced, like something that did not need to be defended. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost under the low hum of the room. Because cost was something he understood better than most, not just in dollars, but in trust, in time, in the slow erosion of belief that happens when you keep proving yourself right about people. "And what do you think it is costing me?" he asked, his voice softer now, less guarded than before. Lily met his gaze without hesitation. "Connection," she said, one word, steady, undeniable, and for a second, the room felt smaller, not uncomfortable, just focused like everything else had faded into the background. Ethan looked down, thumb tracing the rim of his cup, because connection was not something you could calculate, not something you could guarantee. It required something he had spent years avoiding, risk, the kind that does not show up in numbers, only in moments. Lily shifted slightly, resting her hands on the counter, her presence calm, grounded. "You keep waiting for people to fail your test," she continued, her voice even, "but you never give them a real chance to pass." Ethan let out a quiet breath, something between a sigh and a realization, because she was not wrong, not entirely. He had built his world around controlled outcomes, around knowing before investing, around protecting what he had already lost once. And yet here she was, standing in front of him, not playing the game, not following the script, just being exactly who she was without asking for anything in return. "And what if I stop testing?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could measure it. Lily's expression softened just slightly, not a smile, but something close. "Then you might actually meet someone," she said, and the simplicity of it cut through everything else. No strategy, no conditions, just presence. The door chimed softly again as someone left, letting in a brief gust of cool night air, and for a moment, the world outside felt closer than it had before. Ethan sat there, quieter than usual, not because he had nothing to say, but because for the first time, he was considering something he had not allowed himself to before, the idea that maybe control was not strength, maybe it was just another way of staying alone. And as he looked back at Lily, standing there with that same quiet certainty, he realized something small but undeniable. The test he had been running on everyone else might have been the very thing keeping him from the one person who never needed to pass it in the first place. "You are not like the others," Ethan said quietly, almost to himself, as Lily set down a fresh plate in front of him, the diner now settling into that late-night calm, where conversations softened and time seemed to slow. She raised an eyebrow slightly, not flattered, not surprised, just curious. "You say that like it is a compliment," she replied, sliding into the seat across from him for the first time. A small break she rarely allowed herself. And that alone shifted something in the air. Because Lily did not sit with customers, not unless something mattered. Ethan noticed it immediately, the way she rested her hands on the table, relaxed but present, not performing, not guarded, just there. It is not meant to be, he said, meeting her gaze. It is an observation. Lily tilted her head slightly, studying him the way she always did, like she was reading something deeper than his words. "And what do you see?" she asked. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because he did not know, but because saying it felt different than thinking it. "You do not adjust," he said finally. "You do not treat me better or worse based on what you think I have." Lily gave a small nod, as if that answer made sense to her. "Why would I?" she asked simply. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now, more honest. "Because most people do." 3 short sentences, quiet, direct. The truth he had lived by for years. Lily glanced down at the table, her fingers tracing the faint scratch marks in the wood, then back up at him. "Maybe they do," she said, "but that does not mean you have to expect it every time." The words were soft, but they carried weight. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence not empty, but full, like something important had just been placed between them. The hum of the diner faded into the background, replaced by the quiet rhythm of 2 people who were no longer just talking, but understanding. Ethan shifted slightly, his usual control slipping just enough to reveal something real beneath it. "I have been wrong before," he admitted. Lily's expression did not change, but her eyes softened, just slightly. "About people?" she asked. Ethan shook his head once, slow. "About giving them the benefit of the doubt." Lily let out a faint breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "That is not being wrong," she said. "That is being human." The simplicity of it landed deeper than anything else she had said, because Ethan had spent years convincing himself that caution was strength, that distance was wisdom, but sitting there, across from someone who did not need to prove anything. He felt that belief start to loosen, just a little. Lily leaned back slightly, her break almost over, but she did not rush to leave. "Let me ask you something," she said, her tone shifting just enough to signal something different. Ethan nodded once, attentive. "If someone treated you the same way you treat them," she continued, "would you stay?" The question hit differently, not sharp, but precise, like it had been waiting for the right moment to be asked. Ethan did not answer immediately, his mind moving through the patterns he knew so well, the guarded conversations, the quiet tests, the invisible walls he built before anyone could get close. And for the first time, he saw it from the other side, not as protection, but as distance. "No," he said finally, the word quiet but certain. Lily nodded once, as if that was all she needed to hear. "Then maybe it is not about finding the right person," she said, standing up slowly, her shift calling her back. "Maybe it is about being the kind of person someone would stay for." And with that, she stepped away, leaving Ethan sitting there in the soft glow of the diner lights, the weight of her words settling in, not heavy, but undeniable. Because sometimes the truth does not break you. It simply waits until you are ready to hear it. And in that quiet moment, Ethan realized something he had not allowed himself to see before. The life he had built to avoid being hurt might have also been the very thing keeping him from being known at all. "You stayed longer tonight," Lily said without looking at him, her voice soft as she stacked the last few plates near the sink. The diner nearly empty now. Just one flickering overhead light and the quiet hum of machines filling the space. Ethan glanced at his watch out of habit, then slipped his wrist back under the table as if the gesture meant nothing. "I guess I did," he replied, his tone calm, but carrying something new, something less calculated. Lily nodded slightly, drying her hands on a towel. "Most people leave when the conversation gets real," she added, not accusing, just stating a pattern she had seen too many times. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes following the slow movement of her hands. "Maybe I'm tired of leaving," he said, and the words surprised even him, because they were not part of the script he usually followed. Lily paused for just a second, then turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable but attentive. "Or maybe you are just curious," she said, and there was a faint hint of smile, not teasing but understanding. Ethan exhaled quietly, the sound settling into the stillness around them. "What if it is both?" he asked. Lily shrugged lightly. stepping closer but still keeping that respectful distance she never crossed. "Then maybe you're finally being honest," she replied, and honesty, real honesty, not the controlled version he used to offer, felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a space without knowing the rules. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was steady, like two people standing at the edge of something neither of them needed to name yet. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the empty parking lot, and inside, the diner felt smaller, quieter, more real. "Why do you work here?" Ethan asked after a moment, his voice softer, not probing, just curious in a way he had not allowed himself to be before. Lily glanced around the room, as if the answer was somewhere in the worn booths and faded walls. "Because it is honest," she said simply. "People come in tired, hungry, sometimes lost, and for a few minutes you get to give them something real." She looked back at him, her eyes steady. "Not everything has to be complicated to matter." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the words, because his world had always been built on complexity, on layers, on strategies designed to control outcomes. But here, in this quiet place, simplicity seemed to hold more weight than anything he could calculate. "And what do you get out of it?" he asked. Lily smiled faintly, not wide, not dramatic, just enough to soften her features. "Peace," she said, and that word lingered, settling into the space between them like something rare, something not easily found. Ethan looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up at her. "I do not think I've had that in a long time," he admitted, and this time there was no mask, no careful phrasing, just truth. Lily did not respond right away. She simply held his gaze, present, steady, like she was giving him the space to hear his own words. "Maybe you have been looking in the wrong places," she said finally, her voice quiet but certain. Ethan let out a slow breath, something in his shoulders easing without him realizing it, because for the first time in a long time, he was not trying to prove anything, not to her, not to himself. He was just there in the moment, in the quiet, and it felt different, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just real, the kind of real that does not demand attention. It simply exists. Lily glanced toward the clock on the wall, then back at him. "We are closing soon," she said gently, not as a dismissal, but as a reminder that even moments like this have their limits. Ethan nodded, standing slowly, but he did not reach for his wallet right away. He did not rush to leave. Instead, he looked at her, really looked, as if trying to understand something he had overlooked before. "I will come back tomorrow," he said, not as a test, not as a plan, but as a simple statement. Lily met his gaze, her expression calm, unchanged. "You do not have to," she replied. And that was the difference. No expectation, no pressure, just freedom. Ethan gave a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement. "I know," he said, and for the first time, those words felt like something more than control. They felt like choice. And as he turned to leave, stepping into the cool night air, he realized something subtle but undeniable. He was no longer coming back to see if she would pass his test. He was coming back because, somehow, without trying, she had already changed the way he saw the game entirely. "You came back," Lily said, not surprised, not impressed, just noticing as she refilled a cup at the counter. The morning light now, replacing the soft glow of last night, sunlight cutting through the diner windows and revealing every small detail the darkness had hidden. Ethan gave a slight nod as he took his usual seat, but something about him felt different, less guarded, less rehearsed. "I said I would," he replied, simple, but this time there was no layer behind it, no test attached. Lily placed the coffee in front of him without asking, the steam rising between them like a quiet signal of routine. "Most people say that," she said. "They just do not follow through." Ethan wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the warmth settle into his palms. "Maybe I'm trying something new," he said, and the honesty in his tone was subtle but real. Lily leaned against the counter, watching him for a moment. "That sounds dangerous," she replied lightly, but her eyes were searching, as if she was trying to understand what had shifted. Ethan allowed a faint smile, the kind that did not hide anything. "It is," he admitted, "but so is staying the same." 3 short lines, quiet, steady, and then silence, the kind that does not rush to be filled. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, the sound fading as quickly as it came. Inside, the diner began to wake, a few customers trickling in, The rhythm of the day slowly building. Lily turned briefly to greet a regular, her voice warm. Familiar, then returned. So what is the plan today? She asked, casual. But there was something else beneath it, curiosity, maybe even a quiet expectation. Ethan looked down at the menu even though he already knew it by heart. No plan, he said, then glanced back up. Just breakfast? Lily nodded slowly, but she did not look convinced, not suspicious, just aware. Because she had seen enough people to know when something was being held back, even if it was not intentional. You are not. Very good at being simple, she said, not unkindly. Ethan let out a soft breath, something between a laugh and a realization. I am learning, he replied. Lily tilted her head slightly, considering him, then asked, from who? Ethan paused, just for a second, then answered, from someone who does not try so hard. The words were light, but they carried meaning, and Lily caught it. Not with a reaction, but with a quiet shift in her expression, something softer, something more open. She turned away briefly to place an order, giving both of them a moment to breathe. But when she returned, there was a change in the air, not dramatic, just noticeable, like a door that had been cracked open just enough to let something new in. You know, she said, placing a plate in front of him. Truth has a way of showing up whether you invite it or not. Ethan looked at her, the statement landing somewhere deeper than expected. And what if I'm not ready for it? He asked, his voice lower now, more real than before. Lily met his gaze, steady, unwavering. Then it will wait, she said, but it will not disappear. The words settled into the space between them, quiet, certain, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade. The noise, the movement, the passing conversations, all of it distant compared to the weight of something unseen beginning to rise. Ethan nodded slowly, as if acknowledging something he could not yet fully name, but could no longer ignore. And as he picked up his fork, his movements calm, deliberate. There was a subtle shift in the way he carried himself, not less confident, but less controlled. Like he was no longer trying to shape every outcome, just allowing things to unfold. And somewhere, in that quiet change, something else began to build, something neither of them had spoken yet, but both could feel the kind of tension that does not come from conflict, but from truth getting closer, the kind that does not break the room, but prepares it slowly, patiently, for the moment when everything will finally be seen for what it really is. Ethan Cole. A voice echoed from the entrance, sharp enough to cut through the soft rhythm of the diner. And in that instant, something shifted, not loud, not chaotic, just a subtle tightening in the air. Ethan's hand paused mid-motion, fork hovering above his plate. While Lily looked up from the counter, her expression calm but alert. 3 men in tailored suits stepped inside, polished shoes against worn tile, out of place in a room that smelled like coffee and bacon. We have been trying to reach you, the man continued, his tone respectful but urgent. And just like that, the quiet space Ethan had been living in began to fracture, not because of noise, but because of truth finding its way in. Ethan set his fork down slowly. No rush, no panic, just that same steady composure he had carried all along. I told you not to come here, he said, his voice low, controlled, but firm, the kind of tone that did not need to rise to be heard. The men exchanged a glance, hesitant, as if unsure whether they had crossed a line. Lily stood still, not stepping forward, not stepping back, simply watching, because something in her already understood that this moment was not random. It was inevitable. The board meeting has been moved up, one of them added, and the press is waiting. And there it was, the part of his world he had kept carefully out of sight, pressing into the one place he had not wanted it to reach. The room grew quieter, conversations fading as attention shifted, not loudly, but naturally like gravity pulling focus without asking. Ethan exhaled once slow, measured, then stood, his posture changing in a way that was almost invisible but undeniable, not bigger, not louder, just different, like a man stepping back into a role he had never actually left. Lily's eyes followed him, not with shock, not with awe, but with something deeper, something closer to recognition, because the pieces were falling into place, not dramatically, just clearly. You should not be here, Ethan repeated, this time softer, not to the man, but to the moment itself, as if trying to hold onto what it had been before this interruption. The man closest to him lowered his voice. "Sir, the investors are asking questions." And the word hung there, simple but heavy, "sir," not as a courtesy, but as a truth that could no longer stay hidden. A quiet ripple moved through the room, not loud enough to be called a reaction, but enough to be felt like the beginning of something settling into place. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second, not in frustration, not in defeat, just in acknowledgement, because this was always the risk. Truth does not stay hidden forever. It waits, and then it arrives, without asking, without warning. He opened his eyes again, calm returning, not as a mask, but as something real, something earned. And when he turned slightly, his gaze met Lily's. No explanation, no defense, just a silent moment where everything that had been unspoken now stood between them, clear and undeniable. The diner, once filled with ordinary noise, now held something else, something still, something watching. And in that stillness, no one laughed, no one whispered, no one moved, because sometimes the loudest shift in a room is not chaos, it is clarity. And in that clarity, Ethan Cole was no longer just a man in a worn jacket sitting quietly at a corner table. He was something more, something known, and yet the only thing that seemed to matter in that moment was not the suits, not the words, not the sudden weight of recognition. It was the way Lily looked at him, not impressed, not intimidated, just seeing. And for the first time since the truth began to surface, Ethan realized something that no amount of control had ever given him. This was the one moment he could not shape, could not test, could not prepare for. And all he could do was stand there, in the quiet, and let it be revealed. "Say it," Lily said quietly, her voice the only sound that dared to move in a room now wrapped in silence. Not loud, not demanding, just steady, the kind of steady that does not need volume to carry truth. Ethan looked at her, not at the suits, not at the curious eyes around them, just at her, because somehow she had become the only place where this moment actually mattered. He let out a slow breath, not to prepare, but to release. "I did not trust what people would see if I showed them everything," he said, his voice calm, but stripped of the careful control he had carried for so long. The words settled into the room like something heavier than sound. Lily did not react right away. She just held his gaze, giving the truth space to exist without interruption. "So you made sure." "They saw nothing," she replied, not accusing, not harsh, just clear. Ethan nodded once, the movement small but honest. "It was easier," he admitted, then added after a pause. "Or at least I thought it was." The diner remained still, conversations forgotten, plates untouched, because sometimes people do not watch for spectacle. They watch for something real. And this was real, not dramatic, not polished. Just truth finally stepping forward without disguise. Lily glanced briefly at the men in suits, then back at Ethan, her expression unchanged. "And now?" she asked, and the question carried everything that had built between them. Every conversation, every quiet moment, every piece of him she had seen before the rest of the world caught up. Ethan straightened slightly, not to impress, not to perform, but because something inside him had settled, something that no longer needed to hide. "Now I realize I was not protecting myself," he said, his voice steady. "I was preventing anyone from actually knowing me." The words landed deeper than anything before because they were not about money, not about status. They were about something far simpler, far harder, being seen. Lily's eyes softened just enough to show she understood, not because of what he had, but because of what he had just admitted. "And what do you want now?" she asked, and this time there was no distance in her voice, just presence. Ethan did not look away, did not calculate, did not test. He answered without hesitation, "I want to stop hiding from something that matters." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything that had been building from the very first moment she refused to treat him like anything other than a person. The suits shifted slightly, unsure, out of place in a moment that had nothing to do with business or meetings or numbers, because none of that belonged here. Not anymore. Lily stepped closer, not crossing the line, but standing just near enough to be part of the same space, the same truth. "You should go," she said softly, nodding toward the men waiting for him. Not as a rejection, not as a dismissal, but as a recognition that his world still existed, even if it no longer defined him the same way. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding, but he did not move right away. Instead, he looked at her one last time, not searching, not questioning, just present. "I will come back," he said, and this time it was not a test, not a pattern, not a habit. It was a choice. Lily held his gaze for a second, then gave the smallest nod. "Then come back as yourself," she replied. And that was it. No conditions, no expectations, just a simple truth. And somehow, that truth carried more weight than anything else in the room. Ethan turned then, stepping toward the life he had kept separate, the suits falling. And beside him, the world outside waiting. But as he reached the door, he paused for just a moment, not to look back, not to hesitate, but to feel something he had not felt in a long time. Not control, not certainty, but something quieter, something stronger, peace. And behind him, the diner slowly returned to life. Conversations resuming, plates moving, the ordinary world continuing as if nothing had changed. But in the quiet space between what was seen and what was understood, everything had.